The carriage left before she had finished unpacking her trunk. Mira did not watch it go. She stood at the window of the upstairs bedroom, the largest one, which she had been told was hers, and looked out at the October fields instead. Brown grass ran flat to the tree line. A fence along the eastern edge had lost 3 posts. The sky was the color of pewter, and the wind moved through it like something trying to get in. She had been married for 11 hours. Her husband, Mr. Callum Reid, she had not yet decided whether to call him Callum even in her own thoughts, had spoken perhaps 40 words to her since the ceremony. He had handed her into the carriage outside the church without looking at her face. During the 2-hour ride from Harwich, he had kept his eyes on the window and said, at intervals, that the road was bad this year, that the farm had been without a full staff since August, and that Mrs. Dowd, the housekeeper, would show her whatever she needed to know. Then, at the door of Aldenmere, which was the name on the iron gate and, she supposed, the name of her life now, he had said he had business in Boston and would return in a week, perhaps 2. She had nodded. He had not nodded back. He had simply turned and walked to the waiting carriage, and the driver had taken it back down the lane, and Mira had stood in the front doorway with her traveling bag still in her hand. Mrs. Dowd appeared behind her. She was a compact woman in her 60s with a face like a closed book, and the kind of stillness that came from having stayed in a place through many difficult seasons. "I'll show you the rooms," Mrs. Dowd said. Mira followed her inside. She was 24 years old, and the second daughter of a man who had died in March, owing more money than he had made in the last decade of his life. Her older sister, Penelope, had already been married for 3 years, a decent match, not a brilliant one, and was living in Connecticut with her husband's people. Her mother, who was the sort of woman who managed grief through logistics, had produced a solution to Mira's situation by July. Mr. Reid was 31. He had inherited Aldenmere from an uncle who had spent 20 years letting it decline quietly. He needed, her mother had explained, a wife who was sensible and capable and not given to complaint. He was not, her mother had acknowledged, a romantic prospect. But he was solvent, which at this particular moment was the thing that mattered. Mira had understood. She was good at understanding things that were not said directly. She had met Mr. Reid twice before the wedding. Both times he had been polite and almost entirely absent in the way certain people could be physically present and yet entirely elsewhere. She had formed no strong opinion of him. She suspected he had formed no strong opinion of her. The arrangement had a contractual quality that she found, if not comforting, at least honest. What she had not anticipated was Aldenmere itself. She had expected modest. She had expected worn. She had not expected the kitchen garden to be a tangle of dead stems and invasive grass, or the east parlor ceiling to have a brown water stain, spreading from the corner like a slow tide, or the housekeeper's pantry to hold 3 years of receipts in no discernible order, or the account ledger on the study desk to stop mid-entry in 1881 with no explanation. She found all of this in the first 48 hours, not because she went looking for it, but because she was someone who, when left alone in a place, could not help but understand it. She walked through rooms. She opened things. She looked at what was there. What was there was a farm in the process of being slowly forgotten. Mrs. Dowd, it turned out, was reliable. She had kept the house from actual collapse through a combination of discipline, improvisation, and the sheer refusal to let things fall further. She had 2 girls from the village who came 3 days a week. There was a man named Amos who handled the yard and what remained of the livestock. 4 horses, a small dairy herd, and some chickens, and a farmhand named Wesley who helped him, though Wesley was, by Mrs. Dowd's careful phrasing, unreliable in autumn when his brother's cider press was running. "How long has the estate been running without a land agent?" Mira asked on her 3rd morning, sitting across the kitchen table from Mrs. Dowd with a cup of tea she had made herself because the morning girl had not yet arrived. Mrs. Dowd looked at her with the neutral expression of someone says deciding how much to say. "Since Mr. Bates left. That was 2 years ago come December. Who has been managing the accounts since then?" "A firm in Boston. Aldenmere and Associates or some such name. They send correspondence. Mr. Reid handles whatever he handles. I manage the house expenses from the household account and put my own receipts in the pantry. Whether anyone reviews them, I couldn't say." Mira set down her cup. "The ledger in the study stops in 1881, I know. Do you know why?" Mrs. Dowd's expression did not change. "No one has asked me that before. I'm asking now." The housekeeper looked at her for a moment. "I believe, Mrs. Reid, that the ledger stops because no one was entering anything into it. Whether there were accounts being kept somewhere else, I couldn't tell you." Mira nodded slowly. She took the ledger back to the study after breakfast and sat with it for 2 hours. She was not an accountant. She was, however, a woman who had grown up in a household where money was always the invisible subject at every dinner table, present but unacknowledged, like a draft from under a door, and who had, as a consequence, taught herself to read the shape of financial things simply by necessity. Her father's decline had not been sudden. It had been, she could see now in retrospect, there in the gaps, the silences, the moments when certain bills were set aside rather than opened. Aldenmere's ledger had the same quality. It did not look like fraud, it looked like absence. And absence, she had learned, was sometimes what fraud wore, when it wanted to stay invisible. She found the firm's correspondence in the desk drawer. Harwick Land and Property Management, out of Boston. They had been collecting a management fee of $40 a month since the spring of 1880, 18 months before the ledger entries stopped. There was a signed contract, or rather a document, that appeared to be a contract. Though when she looked at the signature line she noticed that the name signed was not Mr. Reid's uncle's name. It was not any name she recognized. She read it twice. She set it carefully aside. She walked to the window and looked at the field where Amos was moving the dairy herd to the south pasture, his breath visible in the cold October air, the cows following with the placid obedience of animals that had been doing the same thing long enough to have stopped thinking about it. Then she went to find Mrs. Dowd. "I need to go into Harwick," she said. "Is there someone who can take me? Amos could manage it in the afternoon after the milking. Then I'll go in the afternoon." She spent the morning writing a letter to the Harwick Register of Deeds. She had found, in the drawer beneath the management contract, the original property deed, and she wanted to confirm what it said against the official record. She was not entirely sure what she was looking for. She was sure that she would recognize it when she found it. In town, she visited the register's office, the county assessor, and a small law office on Merchant Street, belonging to a Mr. Gaines, who had handled the estate of Reid's uncle, and who, when she introduced herself as the new Mrs. Reid, looked startled in a way that was interesting. "I wasn't aware Mr. Reid had married," Mr. Gaines said. "September," she said pleasantly. "I've been reviewing the estate accounts. I had some questions about the management arrangement with Harwick Land and Property." There was a pause. Mr. Gaines straightened a stack of papers on his desk that did not need straightening. "That arrangement was put in place by the late Mr. Reid before he passed." "I see. And was it reviewed when ownership transferred?" "I believe Mr. Reid, the current Mr. Reid, was satisfied with the existing arrangement." "Do you know whether he reviewed it, or whether he was simply not aware of it?" Mr. Gaines looked at her with the expression of a man who was recalibrating his expectations of the conversation he had thought he was going to have. "Mrs. Reid," he said, "are you suggesting there is an irregularity?" "I'm suggesting," she said, "that I can't tell." "Which is itself irregular." She wrote to her husband that evening. A single page, measured in tone, factual in content. She described what she had found. The ledger that stopped, the management fee, the unsigned contract, the fact that Mr. Gaines had not been informed of the marriage. She did not use words like fraud. She used words like discrepancy and clarification required. She ended by saying she intended to continue reviewing the accounts and would keep him informed. She did not expect a rapid reply. She was wrong. His letter arrived in 4 days, which meant he must have written it the same day he received hers. It was 3 lines. It said, "Continue. Tell me what you find. I will return when I can." She read it twice. She read it a third time. Then she put it in the desk drawer where the contract had been, because that seemed like the right place for correspondence that was part of the same problem. She continued. October became November. The water stain on the east parlor ceiling was traced to a broken slate on the roof, which Amos climbed up and replaced with the kind of matter-of-fact competence that made her think he had been waiting for someone to simply ask him to do it. The kitchen garden was another matter. She could not restore a garden in November. The ground was too far gone, and the season too late. But she walked its edges with a notebook and catalogued what was salvageable, what had died, and what wanted different soil entirely. She noted which beds got morning light and which held too much moisture. She drew a rough map. Mrs. Dowd watched this with a careful neutrality that Mira was beginning to understand was the housekeeper's form of approval. The last Mrs. Reid, the uncle's wife, she kept a kitchen garden. Mrs. Dowd said one afternoon, looking over Mira's shoulder at the notebook. Beautiful thing, it was. What happened to it? She died, and after that there was no one who minded. Mira looked at the dead stems and the brown grass and the tangled mess of something that had once been deliberate. "I'll mind," she said. She was not sure she had planned to say it aloud. But it was true, and she had found, since arriving at Aldenmere, that the truest things were the ones that arrived before she could edit them. The account work was more demanding than the garden. She wrote to Harwick Land and Property Management, asking for a full accounting of fees collected and services rendered. The letter she received in return was civil but incomplete. It confirmed the fee amounts and cited general oversight services, without specifying what those services had consisted of. She wrote again, more specifically. She asked for dates, names, property inspection records, and any correspondence with the late Mr. Reid or with the current Mr. Reid authorizing the continued arrangement. The second letter did not arrive for 3 weeks. When it did, it was shorter than the first and less civil. It suggested that matters of estate management were generally handled between the firm and the property owner directly, and implied without quite saying that her inquiry was outside the appropriate scope. She filed both letters in the desk. Then she filed the discrepancies she had found in the assessor's records, which showed the property had been assessed for drainage improvements in 1882, that, as far as she could determine from Amos's knowledge of the land, had never actually occurred. Improvements paid for, presumably, out of the estate accounts. Improvements that existed on paper and nowhere else. She wrote to Callum again. This time the letter was longer. He wrote back in 5 days. When did you learn to read accounts? She almost smiled at that. She wrote, when I had that. His fare. Keep going. She did not know what to do with the version of her husband that existed in correspondence. It bore no resemblance to the man who had ridden for 2 hours without speaking or turned and walked away from his own front door without looking back. This version asked questions. This version listened. She filed those letters in a different drawer. He came back in December, 2 days before Christmas, which she had not expected. She was in the study when she heard the carriage. She had been working through a set of invoices from 1881, cross-referencing them against what the firm's letters claimed to have authorized, and her notes were spread across the entire desk. She did not go to the door. She heard Mrs. Dowd's voice in the hall, and his voice, lower, briefer, and then his footsteps on the stairs, and then silence. She kept working. He appeared in the doorway of the study 20 minutes later. He looked at the desk. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. You've been busy, he said. I have. He came into the room and stood on the other side of the desk and looked at the papers more carefully. She watched him without speaking. She had spent enough time in rooms with people who had power over situations to know that the first minute of a thing often determined the shape of everything after it. What is this, he said, pointing to the column she had labeled unverified disbursements. Money paid out of the estate accounts for improvements or services that I cannot confirm were performed. I have the invoice amounts and the firm's authorization records. I do not have any physical evidence that the work occurred. She paused. I also have a signed contract authorizing the management fee that does not bear your name or your uncle's name. I don't know whose name it is. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. I've never seen this before, he said. I know. He looked up at her. How do you know? Because if you had seen it, you would have recognized that the signature was wrong. He set it down. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat in it, which was not the chair at the desk, which was hers. That small thing did not escape her. Tell me what you've found, he said. All of it, she told him. It took nearly 2 hours. She walked him through the ledger gap, the management fee, the unverifiable improvements, the assessor's records, the firm's evasive responses to her letters. He listened without interrupting, which she had not anticipated. She had prepared for defensiveness, or for the particular kind of dismissiveness that men sometimes aimed at careful women doing precise work. She had prepared her responses to both. He did not require them. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My uncle trusted that firm because a man at his club recommended them. I assumed, when I inherited, that the arrangements were sound. I didn't look. You had other things to manage. That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one, she said. You inherited a property in worse shape than you probably knew, during a period when your own life was not. She stopped. She did not know enough about his life to finish that sentence responsibly. He finished it for her. Not organized. No, it wasn't. He looked at the window. My first wife died in 1880, in childbirth. The child didn't survive either. The room was very quiet. I'm sorry, she said. She meant it in the simple way, without decoration. Aldenmere was the last place I wanted to be, he said. After that, I kept the property because it seemed wrong to sell it immediately. I hired the firm to deal with it. And then I stopped paying attention. She looked at the papers spread across the desk. All those numbers, all that time. The firm took advantage of that, she said. Yes. He paused. It appears they did. He looked at her then in a way he had not looked at her before. Not the polite absence of their first meetings. Not the careful neutrality of his brief letters. She did not have a name for it yet. It was something between recognition and something more complicated than recognition. She did not try to name it. "What would you do next?" he asked. "I would engage an attorney, not Mr. Gaines, someone from outside the county, to review the contracts and the disbursements. If the improvements are documented but did not occur, that is recoverable. I would also recommend we terminate the arrangement with the firm immediately and find a local agent who can be present and accountable." He nodded slowly. "I can be in Boston after the new year. I know someone at a law firm there. That would be appropriate." He stood. He looked at the desk one more time, the notes, the columns, the correspondence filed in careful sequence, and then at her. "You did all of this," he said, "in 2 months. While I was away," she said. Not unkindly, he looked away first. Yes. Christmas passed quietly. He stayed. She had not planned on that, had assumed he would be in Boston again by the 26th, back to whatever city life he maintained there. But he remained at Aldenmere, and he did something she had not expected. He worked alongside Amos in the mornings, doing the kind of physical labor that the farm had needed for years, and that no one had been asking him to do. She watched from the kitchen window the first morning, and felt something shift slightly in her understanding of him. In the afternoons he came to the study. They worked through the accounts together. He knew things she didn't: the history of the property, the original drainage plans, the names of the local contractors who would have been hired for actual work. She knew things he didn't: the gap between the paper record and the physical reality, the pattern of how the fees had increased incrementally over 3 years in a way that would not alarm anyone checking a single year's figures, but became obvious when you laid all 3 years side by side. "You laid them side by side," he said. "It's what you do when you're trying to find something." He looked at her. "Were you looking for something when you started?" She thought about it honestly. "I was looking at the ledger because it stopped," she said. "I didn't know what I would find. I just wanted to understand where things stood, and now you understand." "I understand the accounts," she said. "Aldenmere itself I'm still learning." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you find it as a place?" She looked at the window, at the brown fields going gray in the December light. The fence along the east edge still had its 3 missing posts, though she had spoken to Amos about it, and he had said he'd get to them in January when the ground softened. "I find it honest," she said finally. "It doesn't pretend to be more than it is. I respect that." He said nothing for a long moment. When she looked back at him, he was still watching her with that expression she could not name. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for how I left. On the first day, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to." He was deliberate about it, the way people were when they had decided to say something difficult and had committed fully to saying it. "You came to a strange place with a stranger, and I left you to manage it alone. That was wrong. I told myself it was because of the business in Boston, but that wasn't all of it." She waited. "I didn't want to be here," he said. "I didn't want to be attached to anything after what happened." And a wife felt like an attachment. She looked at him directly, and now, he held her gaze. "Now I find that the attachment has occurred without my permission, and I'm considerably less opposed to it than I expected to be." She did not smile, exactly, but something in her face shifted slightly, and she thought from the way he looked at her that he had noticed it. "That is," she said, a somewhat indirect declaration. "I know." A pause. "I'm better in letters." "You are," she agreed, "though you've improved." January came hard. Snow closed the lane for 5 days, and Amos spent a morning digging out the dairy shed, and Callum was beside him, both of them red-faced and wordless and efficient. She watched from the house, and felt something that she recognized, after a moment, as the specific satisfaction of watching a place be cared for by someone who had chosen to care for it. The letter to the Boston attorney went in the 2nd week of January, signed by both of them. Her detailed account of the discrepancies, his authorization to pursue recovery. She had written the substance. He had added 2 paragraphs at the end that she thought were better than hers in places, and she told him so. "You're generous," he said. "I'm accurate," she said. "It's different." The attorney's reply came in February. The firm was not, it turned out, simply careless. 2 of its principals had been involved in a similar scheme on 3 other properties in Essex County, and there was already a quiet inquiry underway. The signed contract with the false name was useful evidence. The documentation she had assembled over 4 months, organized, sourced, cross-referenced, was, the attorney wrote, among the most useful he had received in such a matter. She showed the letter to Callum. He read it twice. "You knew it wasn't just carelessness," he said. "I suspected. I didn't know." From the beginning? She thought about it. From the second letter they sent me, when they implied I had overstepped by asking direct questions. She folded the attorney's letter carefully. People who have nothing to hide don't imply that you've overstepped by asking what you're owed. He looked at her for a long moment. I should have been here, he said. From the beginning. Yes, she said, because it was true, and he deserved the truth rather than comfort. But you're here now. He was. Spring came in stages, the way it always does in that part of Massachusetts. A week of cold, then 2 days of warmth, then cold again, and then one morning the ground was soft, and the light had a quality it hadn't had since October. And Mira went out to the kitchen garden before breakfast with her notebook from November and began. She planted in sections. The herbs nearest the kitchen door, where they could be reached on short notice. The root vegetables along the south wall, where they would get the most sun. She had ordered seeds in February from a supplier in Albany, and they had arrived in a flat wooden box that she had stored in the cold pantry and checked on twice a week, because she recognized in herself the kind of person who needed to see that things were still there. Callum came out one morning and sat on the stone wall at the garden's edge and watched her work. He had a cup of coffee. He did not offer to help, which she had come to understand was his way of asking whether she wanted company. If she did, she would acknowledge him. If she didn't, she would keep working, and he would eventually go back inside without remark. She acknowledged him. It'll take a season to get it right, she said, not looking up from the row she was setting. The soil here has been neglected long enough that it needs amending before it'll give much back. How long? A good kitchen garden, to be what it should be. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she'd done so far, which was not much but was a beginning. The first year you're just convincing it you mean it. He was quiet. Then, I believe you mean it. She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression, the one she had begun, slowly, to find a name for. It was not, she had decided, admiration, exactly, though there was something of that in it. It was closer to the look of a man who had arrived at something he had not expected to arrive at, and was still in the process of accepting that the arrival was real. She had been watching it develop since December. She had not rushed it. She was not, by nature, a woman who rushed things. I'd like to put a bench here, she said, gesturing to the south end of the garden, where the wall caught the afternoon sun. When the growing season starts properly, somewhere to sit. I'll ask Amos. I already did, she said. He said he could make one from the timber left from the roof repair. I just wanted to tell you. He looked at her for a moment. Why? She thought about it. Because it will be part of the place, she said. And this is your place. You should know what's in it, he said quietly. Our place. She met his eyes. Yes, she said, our place. She went back to setting the row. He stayed on the wall until the coffee was gone, and then he did not go back inside. He came into the garden and crouched beside her and asked what needed to be done, and she told him, and they worked until Mrs. Dowd called them in for breakfast. The fence along the east edge had its 3 posts back by April.